Hey, it's been a while. We think since maybe September of last year, but welcome back to another episode of Dispatches with Hollie McKay. Today, we are answering questions that have come out of a request by Holly for questions to be submitted by people in response to a getting a free subscription to your Substack? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to just go through the questions as they come in. These are the ones that floated to the top, and then we'll let Holly answer them. But first, Holly,
Yes,
it's been
the
a
Ask Me
while, so
Anything series.
yeah, well, I think they're all serious questions because, like that's what people ask you. They ask serious questions. There's nothing here that looks like a TikTok question to me. You ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. The first question is, will you cover Minneapolis?
So I have been covering it. Anyone who follows me, can see that I do a lot of updates. And I have been writing articles looking at exactly who ICE is arresting and what percentage of those are violent criminals. And the latest statistics actually show around 5%. So you're looking at maybe 10% being criminals that are being kind of apprehended, arrested, convicted criminals, I should say, with about half of those being actual violent criminals and the rest being sort of more, other minor crimes not related to violence. So that is the facts. People can argue otherwise about it. But so I've been looking into that and also currently looking into just the cost to the taxpayer of these 70, 80,000 people in these detention facilities. I mean, that's not sort of a necessarily a sort of a cost saving endeavor for the American taxpayer. So I think it's also important to acknowledge, that this does come with significant costs.
Yep. And are these articles all on the Substack or are they also on news publications?
They will be on both, I hope. So I try to because they are behind a paywall, I try to also include them in Substack.
Okay, very good. All right. So, okay, that's Minneapolis. Next question. What is the history of the Somali community in Minnesota? Oh, it's more
Mhm.
Minnesota, both in relation to setting roots in Minnesota and immigrating to begin with, as well as the size and role they play in in the Minnesota community at large.
So Somalis began arriving in Minnesota in pretty large numbers after the collapse of the Somali central government, and that was in 1991. So they were really fleeing a huge, crisis, violence, famine, and a state collapse. Many were resettled by U.S. refugee agencies to Minnesota because of the availability of housing. There was a big hub for manufacturing, strong social services, and I guess really an existing network of Lutheran and Catholic resettlement organizations that were sort of helping to um, ingratiate these people into American society. And so then I think from that point, what you have is chain migration. So once a small Somali community was established, then you had family reunification, you had secondary migration, and that really accelerated growth. And so it didn't take long for Minnesota to really become a hub for Somali Americans worldwide. And it's actually, I think, the largest Somali diaspora in the country is very much concentrated in that Minneapolis, St. Paul kind of area. So, yeah, that's the basic background of how so many Somalis ended up in Minnesota.
Okay. All right. Um, Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, that actually makes sense because if it started in 91, yeah, there's been more than enough time for secondary reunification to have blossomed in that area. Okay,
Yeah, it's
next
been
question.
more than
Yeah,
30
yeah.
years,
Yeah, it has been. It's
35 years.
35 years, which is about halfway to a full immigration socialization cycle, 2.5 generations. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but they're about halfway there. Typically a tumultuous period too. Okay, next question. Um, did the NATO countries send actual armed troops to Greenland? What are the implications if the US sends troops to Greenland?
Well, they did send armed troops. You had several countries that were very alarmed by President Trump's rhetoric, and they sent armed troops, which some may have viewed as a bit of an overreaction, and others viewed it as sort of a necessary action of, asserting that this was sovereign territory, this was Danish territory, and this was not up for grabs. So I think you could sort of view it either way. We already have troops in Greenland. There is a massive air base, the Thule Air Base, that is already there. So the US does already have a military presence. And yeah, again, these things happen with negotiations. The US isn't just going to, well, who knows what President Trump would do, but typically, you're not just going to do a military deployment without sort of the approval of the sovereign nation or that is there, which in this case is a NATO ally. But again, unprecedented things happen right now.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know that that people really are aware that Greenland has been a base of U.S. operations ever since the beginning of the Cold War. So
Yeah.
we've been
And
there. We've been there
again,
all
it's
along.
it's we've been there all along. It's sort of primarily used by the Space Force now. But still, very much a footprint there. And of course, again, it's, our NATO ally um is, in charge of Greenland. So they have very much a footprint there too, which, in traditional alliances, that is how it works, that it doesn't necessarily, you work together as opposed to against each other.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Very good. And we'll stay away from other ancillary topics having to do with that, unless they also come up in other questions. Oh, I think this is also, I'm not sure what conflict this is about, but it's a kind of a broad question. Do you think the goal is to weaken or destroy NATO? It's a person that says, I feel like Putin would really like this outcome.
Absolutely. I mean, Putin certainly, I'm sure, has enjoyed the sort of back and forth tensions over Greenland that are happening. I think Trump has kind of made his disdain for NATO and some of these collective alliances quite well known throughout both his administrations. So I don't think there's anything new there. Um, Destroy is a strong word. I don't know that that is, would be the goal, to quote unquote destroy NATO. Um, but I do think the current administration is certainly not the greatest fan, and doesn't sort of have the same respect for the alliance as maybe previous administrations have had. So while I don't think right now it's necessarily about destroying, but I certainly think it's sort of about um, asserting America's strength and maybe distance from the alliance itself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there has been a running argument for quite a while now, multiple administrations over the relative contribution of NATO countries in terms of their GDP in on military spending versus what the U.S.
Hmm.
spends in that area. So
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we've seen most countries really increase their spending significantly, especially since uh, Russia's sort of all-out invasion of Ukraine. So I think
yeah,
most countries, with the exception of a couple like Spain, that really have kind of taken a step back. So I think, yeah, that when the alliance was formed, it was a what is it, 2%, 2.5% GDP had to be spent. And so a lot of countries haven't met that and haven't met that for a long time. So I think that's important, if that is sort of part of the text of being part of this group, then to kind of meet that. So I don't have a problem with countries being pressured a little bit to step up. I think again, the US to spend a significant, and we could argue about how much of this is waste and overspending on its defense budget. And then, it's hard when you look at countries, part of the alliance, and benefiting from being in this alliance and benefiting from the protection, whilst their population, gets sort of great schooling, great healthcare, all these kind of benefits, and they're not paying their way, that, is part of that agreement. So I think that is important for each country to meet that threshold.
Yep. And yeah, and that's going to be an ongoing uh, point in all of these negotiations going forward. Okay, next question. It's a bit of a long question. I'm going to read it. Given, as you mentioned, that many different things going on in the world, how do you prioritize your time and attention for your work? Do you rely on correspondence from others to almost be in many places at once, or does it come down to a tough personal decision to focus on a single issue?
Think it's a combination of both. Obviously, when you've worked in a lot of places around the world, you hopefully establish good connections, good friends, good people that you can rely on, that you can speak to frequently to kind of get that very personalized lay of the land, and insight into what's happening. Obviously, you want to be there yourself, but that's not always possible. Places like Iran, where journalists can't go in, Gaza, journalists can't go in. So you do have to rely on connections that you have at this point, to be able to sort of as accurately as possible portray that story. Um, and then, but it does also come down to you do have to pick and choose to a degree. And it's very hard, I've had so much sort of hate mail over the years of why aren't you covering this? And then you're complicit because you're not covering this. And you also have to remember that you are one human being. And as a freelance reporter, I'm definitely not a newsroom. So you do have to just focus on those issues, that that for whatever reason, sometimes they're the ones that are the most important to you. Other times they're the ones where you just feel that you have the best ability to tell that story. So yeah, you do have to pick and choose, unfortunately, and that's just sort of the reality of being human.
Yep. Well, and then there's also so you take the time to cover something and try to do it in as fair and balanced a way as possible, and then you still get grief for it.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you can never win. um yeah, you can never win. And I saw a post the other day of a woman, and I don't know if she was a journalist or a writer or something, and she was sort of saying, well, everybody's been giving me all this slack for not posting about XYZ, and she's like, I'm in the hospital with my father who's dying. um and I can't right now. And then I still looked at the comments, and there were still people harassing her for, well, that's quote unquote white privilege, that's this, that's that. So yeah, you can never win about. So yeah, you just have to take it on the chin. I think is what I've learned. Do your best. The rest,
Yep.
take it on the chin.
It is a best efforts business. Yeah. Okay. Next question. Well, now this one, uh, do you think all that's happening in Iran could be a catalyst for other Middle East countries to experience shifts in leadership?
Well, I think that's a concern that a lot of the surrounding countries have, that instability spills out to other countries. That's why you saw, when the Trump administration was ready to strike Iran, a week or so ago, just over a week ago, and you had calls from a lot of the Gulf leadership, and Israel as well, and saying that they just kind of weren't ready for that, of what the ramifications if the regime was to fall. And I think the Gulf countries in particular, as we saw with the Arab Spring back, back in the day, that they have very, big worries about what happens when these protests want to overthrow dictatorships or monarchies, and so that causes a lot of nervousness, I think, in the Middle East, as much as Iran is a massive troublemaker and a massive source of their own problems. That a lot of these countries, it's sort of the devil you do versus the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And so I do think that there is a lot of concern, as much as everyone says that they want the regime to fall, that does come with big question marks.
Well, yes, and well, I think a lot of these countries actually know that without a foil like Iran out there, that they have their own problems, and they're pretty well aware of what their own potential instabilities are. And can you really blame them for not wanting those instabilities to ignite in a vacuum?
Um, Sure, you can see it from that, but you can also see it from the point of view of what the horrors of this regime has done for decades on Iranian people and what it continues to do, how it continues to treat protesters, the slaughter, taking, pulling people out of hospitals. I mean, this is humanity at its absolute worst, where you're talking about tens of thousands of people dead in a very short period of time. And so I'm always going to stand with the people, as opposed to these very wealthy, governments who, heaven forbid, if they lose their place at the top of the palace.
Yeah, well, rational economic wealth maximizing behavior boils down to which edge of the knife that you happen to be standing on at the moment. Not, well, that is the Middle East, actually, when you really look at it. It's a tapestry.
Mm.
Yeah, and a difficult tapestry. And I don't think that anything's going to make that change soon, do you?
Well, I don't rule out possible US military action, even though it seems like the height of it has died down. I think anything's possible right now. So I haven't I don't know that the window is over.
Okay, very good. All right. So quick pivot, because this is the order of the questions that we have on the sheet. So this one goes back to, well, it goes back to Greenland. Okay. How do you feel about Trump's behavior regarding buying Greenland and his behavior toward Iran? Well, it's both of them. How has ballet affected your adult life and career? And would you recommend parents put their kids in it? If so, why? What might regime change in Iran look like? Are you considering Middle East reporting? That's a lot of separate questions. You
Yeah.
you figure out which aspect of that you want to answer.
Yeah, I totally will. So, I mean, the Greenland thing has been very exhausting and a very, again, a man, a crisis that was totally unnecessary, especially when so many other things are happening. So I don't think I'm not going to sit here and attempt, like I've seen people do, try to sort of rationalize this sort of buying sovereign land that's not for sale. So I think that, yeah, his behavior was totally delusional, irrational, kind of like a toddler having a tantrum that, wouldn't give up. And then it just, kind of a complete sort of 360 pivot and then framing it in his head as a victory. So it just, you can't always make sense of things that don't make sense. And that whole fiasco, which seems to flare up and down, is, yeah, is just, is very, yeah, silly behavior. Um, in terms of the ballet, yeah, I mean, it's a very sort of very pivotal part of my life still. Definitely shaped a lot of the decisions I've made. I think it teaches you extraordinary discipline, and it teaches you, just a sort of a very strong kind of bodily situational awareness that has been, very grounding, I think, for me in my career. And surprisingly, and I've written about this before, there is so much that is sort of connected between ballet and war reporting in that sense. And um, they're both just ways of communication. They're both, fundamentally, it's about storytelling in very different ways. But yet, that is, yeah, the core of who I think I am and my career trajectory. So, yeah, ballet is still a huge part. And certainly, if parents, if your child has an inclination or parents, it's definitely something that is worth trying. Your child may or may not like it. And that's okay. But I think, yeah, the musicality, again, the discipline, the showing up, the movement, the awareness of your body, I think they're all very positive aspects for kids today that I think it's a we tend to think of ballet as this I don't know, it's sort of an art form, but I think what we often forget is it is the most pure and extreme form of athleticism. The strength that you have to have, the ability to make things look easy. I mean, that just it factors in so many things um, that you don't get from many other sports. So I think in that way, it's just, it's an incredible sort of art and athletic form mixed together. So hopefully that answers that one a little bit. Um, are you considering Middle East reporting? Well, I've spent, I think, majority of my, career in and out of the Middle East, and still something that, I'm very invested in. I'm sort of working on a project I can't say too much about now, but that is sort of involves going back to Middle East. But I'm always, yeah, in different parts of the world. My next focus is Latin America, but yes, Middle East, Africa, wherever I feel that I can tell a compelling story is where I go. I think that maybe the last couple of years, I haven't worked so much in the Middle East. I think because I've been more focused on Africa and Asia and Central America, because that's just sort of where, different stories have called me. But the Middle East will always have a strong pillar in a lot of what I do.
Okay, very good. So my follow-up question on the ballet thing is, so for Raven, ballet or dancing to the Baby Shark songs?
Well, she actually loves ballet. I was watching a ballet movie on New Year's Eve with her, and I didn't really think she was paying attention. It was more for me than her. And then the next day, all of a sudden, all she wanted to do was walk on her toes and kept saying, "Mommy, I'm doing ballet." And every time sort of some classical music comes on, she'll say, "I love this song. I love this song." So she definitely has like a very musical love for ballet and extraordinary posture and extraordinary feet. I can already tell it too. So, yeah, maybe when she's a little bit older, we'll see if she enjoys it. She may or she may not, but I think she'll always have a love for that kind of movement in music.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Okay. So next question goes back to Iran. This questioner asks if Iran were to close the Strait of Hormuz, the global effects would be profound, politically, economically, and militarily. The strait is one of the most strategic, critical maritime choke points in the world. What is the most important story shaping people's lives right now that is
Oh, they're two separate
not?
questions. Two separate questions. Stop.
Oh,
Okay.
what? Oh, they are? Okay. Well,
Strait of Hormuz. Yeah,
there
Strait of
doesn't seem to be
Hormuz.
much of a question in that one because
Yeah.
I don't see
So
the question.
basically, I think what they're asking is, I think the consequences of closing the Strait of Hormuz would be huge. I think, yeah, the consequences would just be very, very immediate energy shock. When you think about it, around 20% of global oil supply passes through that strait every single day. So any closure would just cause an instant spike in oil prices, likely above 150 per barrel in the first few days, which is huge considering that the sort of cozy spot for oil is typically around, 70, $80. So natural gas markets, especially in Asia and Europe, would just skyrocket. You would have a huge global economic fallout. You would have inflation surging worldwide, and this doesn't just affect fuel itself. You're looking at food, you're looking at manufacturing, imports, exports, shipping, every possible ripple effect would hit your wallet. So it would be huge. And then you probably have a military response that would have to come with that. There would be a lot of unrest, a lot of uncertainty, and just, I guess, the general risk of escalation. So yeah, it's hard to overstate the sort of consequences that would happen, if that was closed. And I think that it would really impact Iran, which is why I'm, I guess, optimistic that they wouldn't do that, because don't forget, Iran also relies on that strait for its own exports, oil, and its imports. So that would just cripple their already devastated economy, I think, worsen the domestic unrest, and really just that could be the nail in the coffin for the regime. So I think I don't see that happening, but certainly if it did, it would be huge.
Yeah, I tend to concur with the second half of your response. Iran is as dependent on keeping the Straits of Hormuz open as everybody else that's there. They need it for their economy. They have major ports in and approximate to that area that are a lifeline as far as hard cash is concerned. So it's a great theoretical topic, but when you get down to the practicalities of it, the incentives are pretty muddled and argue actually in favor of keeping that strait open for all parties involved. no matter what the other stresses are in the region. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a yeah, it's but I don't know that a lot of people really get that aspect of it, that it's a bit more complex than the simplistic shut the thing down and start shooting missiles back and forth across the strait.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the global ramifications for everyone involved would be too drastic for
Yeah.
that to happen.
Yeah.
I would
It's not
hope
in their
cooler
interest.
heads prevail. Yeah,
Yeah. Including cooler heads in Iran, actually, I think. Um,
yeah.
money talks. Um, Last question, which I started to get to because it was the one that had a question mark at the end of it, reading this one. But this is definitely an independent question. What is the most important story shaping people's lives right now that is not getting coverage, and who benefits from it staying in the shadows?
There are many of these stories around the world that just don't get the coverage. And for me, for a long time, that was definitely Sudan, which is sort of why I covered that and went there, because just the atrocities still continuing to happen there are unfathomable. At least it is getting a little bit more attention now than it used to. Um, Certainly, yeah, people are much more aware of what's happening in Darfur than they were a year ago, which is even though maybe nothing is inherently changing on the ground, but awareness is obviously that first step. But really, what I would say, the most long running story that doesn't get attention, that most people have very little awareness of, that comes to the top of my head, really is what happens in the Congo, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I mean, these are just really, again, some of the most horrific war crimes, horrific levels of sexual abuse, like just so uncomfortably frequent. And I mean, we're not just talking, women and teenage girls, we're talking children, we're talking babies. I mean, this is really, really sick stuff. Just the level of how prevalent this um, is, yeah, once you go into the weeds with it, it's very hard to sleep at night. But I think, overall, why we don't hear a huge amount from the horrors of the Congo. I think for one, Africa just doesn't get the attention it deserves, because again, sort of the US is primarily focused on things maybe closer to its neighborhood or things that are sort of more immediately impactful. But certainly, we do have interests in Africa, as many countries do. But I think why you don't always hear about them. There's a number of reasons. You've got multinational corporations extracting cobalt, coltan, gold, diamonds. These are all, big commodities in the area. So you've got forced labor, child mining, militia violence on top of it all. And so these are very distant abstractions rather than these front page scandals. I think foreign governments that rely on these Congolese minerals for green energy, defense, tech supply chains, they want to avoid as much public pressure as possible to regulate, sanction, or anything that can kind of interfere with their ability to go about their operations. Regional armed groups and warlords, I mean, they thrive in obscurity. So, um, unfortunately, these atrocities only escalate when there is no international spotlight and no accountability, which there is very little of in this part of the world. You've also got corruption from the top. So you've got very corrupt elites at the top that profit from these sort of opaque deals, resource theft. You've got sort of I think at the end of it too, a very overstretched media ecosystem. So again, media, there is so much happening in the world that it's always hard for the media to be everywhere covering everything. And I think the longer that these conflicts drag out, which in this case it's been going on for many years, I guess the attention does wane, but that doesn't mean that the horrors stop. So um yeah, the Congo is just a place to me that is hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah. Yeah, on the news sources, it's really just kind of the BBC that routinely reports on stuff like this these
Yeah,
days. Yeah. Everybody else is concerned with other things in other parts of the world, which is
yeah.
sad. But okay, so that gets all of the questions that are on the list, and as always, you answer them with that professional reporter's quick response that lets everybody know that you're pretty much on top of where things are in the world. So,
No,
well, you do. You are. You're a pro, you
we'll
know.
try.
Yeah, more than try. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna say thank you. Let you get back to what's going on in your world today. You've been very, very gracious, and that we've been very, very lucky that we haven't heard a third party coming around trying to wiggle around you during this particular interview. So not that I kind of like it when that happens, but
Oh my gosh. Yeah, sometimes. I was on a call, with some sort of high-ranking government people the other day, and my husband, he was out, and so Raven, I thought she was settled enough in the living room, but she decided to get out Moroccan drums, and not only did she just have the Moroccan drums in the living room, she decided to come right next to my desk with the Moroccan drums. I had to apologize profusely. Just, yeah,
eh,
perfect timing, and it
yeah, I
happens.
know. But that is, yeah, she's a special kid, and
Yeah.
with very good timing for uh, letting you know that there's more going on in the world than being serious all the time about these very difficult topics. All right, Holly, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Take care.